Hello and welcome to some more Star Citizen. We had a load of juicy infos from the lore and narrative team on Pyro, politics, and where do all the dead bodies go in game. This is all from a Lawmakers Community Questions post from November that I'll summarise here. Why are both Pyro and Lorville reworks moving so far away from the established lore? The question continues. Pyro no longer matches its lore. Instead of being lifeless hellholes blasted by pulsar-like radiation, planets are now life-bearing, water-bearing, and habitable. Also, the rework of Lorville feels much too prosperous for the dictatorship oligarchy of the Hurstons. Frankly, the existing lore matches the current city much better. Is there a reason that Pyro and Lorville doesn't match the old lore? So, the narrative team answered, simply, game development is extremely collaborative and narrative is but one piece of the puzzle. While the process often begins with our team providing particulars on location, character, or other aspect of the game, we know that it's not where the conversation ends, but where the collaboration begins. In addition, the open development process provides greater insight into how things get constantly iterated upon and refined. For example, narrative descriptions of planets or moons that alluded to their resources being picked clean were written prior to the development of tech that would allow players to fully explore planets. That wording was chosen to explain why people don't or couldn't go to certain locations, but that had to change once they were. We adjust the lore when we can, but other times we have to retcon it to make it work, as with Stanton, whose discovery date was pushed back and the linked galactic guide updated with a note specifying that changes were made. What ends up in game will be what's official and the lore around modified to match. That's the high-level explanation of why adjustments were made to Pyro. Meanwhile, the changes coming to Lorville are more subtle and an example of how we provide the broad strokes on something so there's room for other teams to iterate. The Hurston Dynamics building lording over Lorville is definitely a striking image that captures the company's essence, but the changes to the skyline still fit within the overall lore for the company and the planet. Despite their devastating environmental policies and cruel labour practices, the family and company would still want to project wealth and power to those who visit. They want to impress guests, entice potential executives and labourers to the planet, and even prove to others that strong authoritarian leadership can produce such prosperity and wealth. What is Pyro's star type? Because it appears to have been labelled a K-type star and an M-type star. Which is it? The narrative team answered, it's a K-type main sequence flare star. A flare star is a variable star that can undergo unpredictable and dramatic increases in brightness across the electromagnetic spectrum within a few minutes. Most flare stars are M-type and K-type, which means in a nutshell that they are lower in mass and luminosity than Sol, which is a G-type star. To fit the established lore of the system without making it too cold, we decided to make the star of Pyro a K-type, putting it in between an M-type and a G-type in brightness. This keeps Pyro unpredictable and dangerous, but allows for conditions that might support the development of life on some of its planets. Its classification was adjusted after the initial lore was written for the system. The star map was updated accordingly, but some of the older lore still needs to be adjusted. We plan on updating that specific and others related to Pyro as we prepare for the system's release. What happens to all the dead corpses left after you die in-game? So, do they get sort of collected by some space company, or processed into genetic goods, or something more sinister? The answer? Yes. This is quite a macabre dilemma poised by regen tech, but the lore is filled with possibilities. Sometimes corpses would need to be collected for investigatory reasons if the death was criminal. Other times the body could possibly fall into the hands of nefarious individuals intent on a weekend at Bernie's shenanigan, or who are looking to make a quick credit selling to the black market, organ dealers and their ilk. Some landing areas would have sanitation crews tasked with dealing with that issue. There could also be humanitarian orgs that gather corpses and administer proper space burials. Political parties. Are there only 3 political parties in the game? Universalist, Centralist, and Transitionalist. I ran across some Hurston Dynamics lore mentioning a Workers' Party. Is this lore sort of supporting a fourth party that will have a great influence on gameplay, like the others? The answer here, there are more than 3 political parties that exist in the UEE. The 3 that they mentioned are merely the most popular and widely represented within the current government. Belonging to one of those parties isn't necessary for political success, as is evident with Lani Addison being elected Imperator after running as an independent candidate. Yet joining one of the big 3 parties does provide a stronger base of voters, donors, and like-minded elected officials. Critics of the Addison administration often point to her lack of political allies, which would not be an issue if she belonged to a party, and that's a reason that several of her major initiatives have stalled. Meanwhile, the group you're probably thinking of is the United Workers of Hurston, who were created to advocate for worker rights on Hurston. They are more of a labour union than a political party, though. Hurston owns the planet and can govern it as they see fit, meaning no requirement for a governing body of elected officials as long as they uphold and enforce the UEE common law. That said, the UEE would be filled with a lot of smaller political parties that represent different goals and interests. Some would be focused on local issues, and others may be focused on bigger ambitions. So the door is open for other political parties to influence politics across the Empire. In the Galactopedia articles dedicated to Jax McCleary and Whitley's Guide, it is specified that Jax signed a contract with Whitley in 2950 to host the show, even though the first shows where they were together start from 2949 in the IAE. Should we consider that 2949 was a trial run that formalised it into a full-time contract in 2950? The answer here, 2950, was the year Jax signed a long-term deal with Whitley's Guide, with both Jax and Whitley's being famous and well-respected in the field. They partnered for coverage of the 2949 IAE and enjoyed the experience enough to make it a regular thing in 2950. A decision one must wonder if Whitley's regrets after Jax's disappearance following the 2951 Expo. Obviously, he's reappeared now. Stanton's birthday. Why didn't you do an event to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the discovery of the Stanton system? The answer here, there's a few reasons from a lore perspective why a big Stanton centennial celebration didn't occur. While the system was discovered in 2851, the megacorps that now own the planets didn't take control of them until 2865. If there's a 100-year anniversary, the megacorps would want to celebrate it, and that puts them in the spotlight. They'd want to do it when it was 100 years after them taking over, and one of those megacorps would have to pay for such a celebration. There is a Stanton System Conference held annually between the 4 megacorps to discuss system-wide issues, but that is more focused on how they can address collective issues like rampant crime, rather than how to promote or celebrate the system. Why did the Messers never decide to invade the decentralized and weaker Banu? The Messers could have used the war as a way to gain a popular support and use the spoils of war to enrich themselves and the Empire, ultimately extending the life expectancy of their reign. The answer here, since the Messers were obsessed with consolidating and retaining their power, they must have determined that invading the Banu Protectorate worked against those goals. First, justifying a war against the one species humanity had a good relationship with from first contact would be a tough sell to the Empire. Humans and the Banu had over 100 years of shared history before either Messer came to power. So it would take a lot of propaganda to convince the people that this mostly peaceful trading-obsessed species deserved to be conquered. Meanwhile, first encounters with other alien species, Tavaran, Xi'an, Vandal, were all contentious, making them more natural enemies of the Empire. Besides the difficulties in convincing the masses of the need of such a war, a high-level look at the wider universe and political trends of the Messer era hints at other deterrents to an invasion. The regime rose to power under Ivan Messer in 2546 between the First Tavaran War and the Second Tavaran War, and 16 years after the contentious first contact with the Xi'an. Being actively engaged in a war against one species while maintaining a fragile Cold War with another seems like a good reason to not push aggression towards the Banu. In the decades after the Second Tavaran War, the Messer family fought amongst themselves for control of the regime. With their eyes turned towards internal enemies, it's not a surprise that they didn't look for others in the wider verse. Then in 2681, the Vandal made their presence known. The UE struggled under their constant attacks and ceded several systems to the Vandal, leaving them unable to protect one side of the Empire and still worried about the Xi'an threat on the other. The Messer regime remained in a pinch between those two species for the rest of their reign, and increasingly had to focus on measures to keep their own empire in order. Opening a third front against the Banu must not have seemed like a good idea, while already overwhelmed by those other issues. Finally, there isn't much to support the idea the Banu would necessarily be a weak opponent. Though they plan to push towards diplomacy whenever possible, they would probably be a surprisingly effective military strength in a conflict. While their government is decentralized, they do have the capability and capacity to sort of unify all of the Banu and a lot of their ships against an external threat. Are there any new plans for weekly narrative team updates? Yes. While we're still discussing the specifics, expect some changes to our weekly posts in the new year. What I can say with certainty is that lore videos, even short ones, aren't on the cards. Producing them would require support from other teams who don't have the bandwidth for additional work. Boom! That's it for your lore and narrative updates today. But what do you think? Are you happy with the evolution and retconning of sort of Pyro lore and generally the lore in-game? Do you think that Star Citizen being an alpha and still being built out gives Cloud Imperium a lot more leeway to be able to change the lore and sort of change it based on what they want the game to be like and what they want sort of in-game mechanics to be like? Obviously, the game's scope has expanded somewhat and they need gameplay to fill all the star systems, and they can have more appropriate or different gameplay now in a lot of the areas compared to what they had originally had envisioned. Did you support Leilani Addison when you were able to vote for her as Imperator, or did you vote for one of the other parties? Do you think that sort of stuff makes a difference? I mean, they talk about it occasionally. You sort of see occasional lore posts, I suppose, about Leilani Addison. Do you think that's going to have any in-game effect in the future if we vote for different operators again one day in the far future? Whatever your thoughts, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below.
Hello, I'm Winston Churchill, and I use NordVPN to defend the Internet Empire. We will fight the ants on the beaches. We shall fight on the Internet. We shall fight the trackers and the malware. Whether we want to watch Netflix for another country or have greater accessibility to the Internet, we will defend our island home. At any rate, that is what we're programmed to do.
Thanks, Winston Churchill. What? What do you mean, Sin? That wasn't Winston Churchill? Point still stands. Go to nordvpn.com/BoredGamer to get yourself discounted NordVPN, or use the links below. Every month we have a ship giveaway. For November, we're giving away a Crusader Spirit C1. It's a fantastic looking multi-role ship that can fit a vehicle in the back or a load of cargo, and it looks really cool. It's got loads of forward-facing weaponry and a tractor beam. As it's a concept ship though, the winner will have a Cutlass back in the meantime as a loaner. It comes with access to the game and lifetime insurance too, so bam! Even if you don't have Star Citizen stuff yet, you can get straight into the game with this. It's all you need. Just comment on any of my videos this month to be in for a chance of winning. A massive thank you to everyone that has used the join button under my videos to become a channel member, and my Patreons. You guys are awesome. It really does help the channel. Please consider becoming one of those lovely people too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the verse.